we were wrapping up a section of Scripture, 7 through 10, and so basically if you turn to Revelation 20, verses 7 through 10, and we'll begin there, but we're going to spend most of our time today looking at a passage in the Old Testament, in the book of Ezekiel. But once you found that, it's going to sound familiar because we spent time talking about this section in Revelation last week. And so let me read those verses to you, beginning in verse 7. When 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand of the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They were tormented day and night forever and ever. Wow. We've talked a good bit about Satan being confined and then loosened and for various periods of time as ordained by God. But then we stopped right as we were getting ready to talk about Gog and Magog. And that's where we're going to focus our time this morning. We're going to spend time in the book of Ezekiel, reading about Gog and Magog, and then we're going to spend time talking about the prophecy Ezekiel had in comparison to the prophecy that John gives us here in Revelation chapter 20. As we think about this concept of Gog and Magog, when we get to Ezekiel, they're both mentioned. Magog in the Hebrew means land of Gog. And so it kind of carries with it the idea that Gog is a king or a prince in charge of this land of Gog. It's going to be familiar to the Jews because of the passages in Ezekiel and in some of the other canonical books in the Old Testament. But it's what the problem with Gog and the land of Gog is it's not mentioned anywhere else. There's no historical records of it. Nothing can be found in the Jewish history. But to understand it better, I want us to spend time in Ezekiel. In our daily Bible reading, we're in Ezekiel now, kind of back and forth between Ezekiel and Jeremiah. Ezekiel is a prophetic book. And you may recall the reading we've been doing through the chapters in Ezekiel. Ezekiel is already in captivity. Jeremiah is still in Jerusalem, prophesying about the fall of Jerusalem, the temple. And both of them are talking about after this period of exile, the Jewish nation will be returned. And Jerusalem will be rebuilt, the temple will be rebuilt, God will be with them. And so up until this passage in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Ezekiel talks about all these different nations that are going to be destroyed. Tyre and Sidon and the Moabites and Egypt and on and on. All these various nations that will be destroyed, that God will see to their destruction. And then in chapter 38, out of the blue, we have this mention of Gog and Magog. And so if you would like, I would encourage you to turn to the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel, of course, is in the Old Testament. If you find Jeremiah, you're almost there. Keep going past Lamentations, and you're going to end up pretty close to the book of Ezekiel. And so Ezekiel chapter 38. And I kind of imposed on Tony to do some reading. And we're going to be hitting various chapters in these two chapters in Ezekiel, 38 and 39. And so, Tony, if you would you read verse 1 through 6?
The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against God of the land of Magog, and chief what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, O God, and